Testing. Good evening. My name is Walter Middlebrook, a Foster Professor of Practice in the Journalism Department of the Don Peter Belisario College of Communications at Cincinnati State University. On behalf of the college, I'd like to welcome you to the Foster-Foreman Conference for Distinguished Writers. In the late 1990s, Larry Foster had a vision to improve the quality of writing at Penn State. A 1948 graduate, a former newspaperman, a highly successful public relations executive, and an author, Larry understood that good writing was the essence of what we do in the college. So he and his wife, Ellen, a 1949 graduate, endowed the Foster Professorship in Communications. In 1999, Larry Foster asked Gene Foreman, a nationally known former managing editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, to become the first Foster Professor. Gene knew something about writing. During his quarter century at the Inquirer, the paper won 18 Pulitzers and became known not only for its hard-hitting investigative reporting, but also for its compelling writing. Larry and Gene established this two-day conference to bring some of the country's most respected journalists to campus. Since 1999, we've had presentations by more than 40 Pulitzer-Prize winners. Gene and his successor, Tony Barbieri, a former managing editor at the Baltimore Sun, have left quite a legacy with this program, and it's my challenge to try to build on that foundation. Larry Foster, our beloved benefactor, and to whom we'll be forever indebted, died in 2013. So let's talk about tonight's event. As we constantly remind our students, good writing can't happen without good reporting. Our 2021 speakers are the personifications of those qualities and more. Tonight's speaker, Jim Schaefer, you'll hear more about shortly. But before I introduce him, I want to invite you to join us tomorrow morning at 10:35 in this same room to hear Stephanie Saul of the New York Times. Stephanie will talk about her work, writing, and story forms and elevation of writing standards. It's a presentation you don't want to miss. Stephanie, would you please stand? All right, here's a brief note about tonight's format. First, Jim will present his prepared remarks. Then he'll be joined on stage by tonight's moderator, Associate Professor Juliet Pinto. They'll have a discussion in which we hope you'll enjoy and join. There are microphones set out in the audience, so you're invited to come down and ask questions during that part of the program. Now, for the reason we're all here. Tonight's speaker, Jim Schaefer, is proof positive of the state of journalism today. A longtime reporter editor, Jim is on a team fighting a news battle in one of America's few remaining two major newspaper towns. And he's doing it in one of the nation's more embattled cities. He also could be described as a blueprint of today's multimedia journalist. His career began as a copy editor. Before branching out to reporting, he would eventually work as a paper designer, become a video game critic, and for 12 years, produced a Sunday feature on Quirky People. He has also spent 3 years as an investigative producer for a local TV station. Currently, Jim Schaefer is the Senior News Director for Business, Autos, Education, and Investigations at the Detroit Free Press. He was the lead reporter investigator for a package of stories that won the 2009 Pulitzer-Prize for local reporting. Those stories revealed a text message scandal that led to the downfall and jailing of then Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick. The investigation also revealed that Kilpatrick had misused $8.4 million in taxpayer money to cover up his secret marital affairs. Jim and his then reporting partner, M.L. Elric, had been uncovering scandals involving the mayor since 2002, earning them the Clark Mullenhoff Award for investigative reporting in 2005. It was the uncovering of nearly 14,000 text messages in 2008 and the resulting reports that led to their policy. The reporters' work earned them 6 other national awards in 2008 through 2009, including the George Polk Award for Local Reporting, the Associated Press Managing Editors Public Service Award, and the Pulitzer-Prize for Investigative Reporting. As one Bingham Award judge noted, the outstanding work by the Detroit Free Press used feisty reporting on a fast-breaking news story to expose a mayor's lies and then explain his complex deceptions to the most important stakeholders, the citizens of Detroit. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you the reporter's editor, a protector of the stakeholders, our 2021 Foster-Foreman Conference speaker, Jim Schaefer.
It's a lot of lies, Walter. I may be the first undistinguished writer to appear at this conference. As my friends are fond of telling me, they'll give a Pulitzer to anybody. But I gotta tell you, I'm really nervous to be here. I don't usually get nervous, but man, I feel pretty doggone jumpy tonight. I feel like I might stammer a little bit. Anybody else feel that? You guys? Can you tell I'm nervous? Not about this thing. I'm talking about the big game Saturday night. Because I went to Ohio State. Sorry. But I have great respect for Penn State, trust me. And Walter, I love your Michigan State folder. Thank you for bringing that. I had $2 at Michigan State. So my money goes there, my heart's in Columbus. But man, I'm glad that game is not here Saturday night. Starting to reverb there, huh? Is that me? You want me to turn it? Is that a mic on? Can't see. Oh, you're just moving. It's all ready. Want me to use this instead? It's too crazy. I mean, there's going to be a lot on the line for this game Saturday night. Can you guys hear me okay? How's that? Less ear shattering. I really am looking forward to that game. I wish the best for both teams, and I hope there is a resounding victory for the team that deserves it most. How about that? That's as gracious as I can be. Anyway, thank you for having me here at the great Penn State University. I've never been here. I've always wanted to come to Happy Valley. I see it on TV. I drove past the stadium on the way in. Very cool. Went to Old Main, that's what it's called. Took some pictures in front of it. Nice building. Beautiful campus, you guys. I'd like to thank Walter, who is a longtime friend of mine from Detroit. He's worked all over the place, but most recently he's been slogging it out in the trenches with us in Detroit. He was at the Detroit News, which is the other paper in town, but we served on the same SPJ board together. So thank you, Walter, and everybody else who invited me here tonight. I really appreciate it. Anyway, let's get started. You're mostly journalism students, right? Yeah, forced to be here by your professors? Who has to be here because their professor told them to be here? All right, I love that. I'm a professor too, not a real one, an adjunct, and I would force my students to go to this speech, even if it is boring. I've got to ask you guys a question. Raise your hands that you're journalism students. Are you really going to go into journalism? Show of hands if you are. Yeah? Okay, that's a pretty good number. Glad to see it. Are you crazy? What are you thinking? You haven't been paying attention, apparently. Do you know the state of the industry? Your professors tell you the state of the industry? You guys talk about that? Let me give you a real world example. I don't know where you got this man in the trenches stuff, but I've been in Detroit for a long time. When I got hired at the Free Press at the beginning of time, which was more specifically 1988, None of you know that year, except maybe some of my colleagues here. We were strong at the Free Press. We were well-staffed. We were fat. We were happy. We had, I guess, and this is my memory being tested here, more than 350 journalists in our newsroom. We had bureaus. Man, did we have bureaus. Listen as I tick these off. In Michigan, we had bureaus in Lansing, the state capital, and then the counties that surround Detroit, Oakland, Macomb, Wayne, Washtenaw, bureaus, separate from the main newsroom. We had a guy who roamed the state of Michigan looking for takeout stories. We had a guy who roamed the United States looking for takeout stories. We had a Washington bureau with several people staffed in it. We had a Canada bureau based in Toronto. I used to live in that guy's house. When they closed the bureau, he came home and kicked me out of his house. Not cool. 6 months early. It was only in there for a short period. We had an Eastern Europe bureau based in Poland. And we were one of 2 U.S. newspapers who had a correspondent station in South Africa during the apartheid era. Now that is a big operation for a regional newspaper. Fast forward 3 decades, guess how many of those bureaus exist today? Anybody? 0? 1? 3. Good guess. 2. We have a bureau in Lansing, the state capital, and 1 guy in Washington to look out for our interests, our Michigan interests there. As for our newsroom, we've gone from about 360 people, I think it was, or so, down to less than a third of that. We have about 100 people in my newsroom today. Don't hold me to that. The number fluctuates. So you want a piece of that? Are you sure? Let me ask you another question. Can anybody tell me, and I hate to put you on the spot, why do you want to get into journalism? Anybody got a good reason? Yes?
Me?
Yeah.
I really have a passion for delivering news to people that deserve to know what's going on in their community. I feel like it's important for the public and
Educate the public, tell them what they need to know. Great answers. Anybody else? Come on, somebody else has got it. Got to have a reason. Yes, in the back of it.
Free press is imperative for democracy.
I actually have a shirt on underneath here that says democracies demand journalism. Totally, I agree with you 100%. Anybody else? Oh, lots of hands now. No, very back in the green.
I'm definitely a people person. I love to meet everyone and to welcome everything. So I think for me, like I want to be able to travel and write stories and see new places.
Awesome. Somebody else is over here in the red back there?
I want to get paid to watch baseball.
That's a great answer, but you know what happens? You start to hate baseball.
I watch the Phillies, I already do.
Anybody else want to throw in one last one? Yes, over here in front. And what?
Just the experience, generally.
Just the experience. It is very cool. I can tell you lots of stories in that experience. You get to do a wide variety of things. Those are all great answers. So let me tell you why I'm here tonight. It's because, yes, local journalism is still here, despite all that stuff that I just told you. And it still really matters. In my place, no, we're not covering the world anymore. Show off on me. We've shrunk down to our base. But literally, we have shrunk down to what's most important to our readers. And I mean, it's really no small thing. We have come back to do what's most vital and necessary in terms of journalism. Covering our backyard. There's no one else who can do that as well and as consistently as local journalists. It certainly can't be done as effectively by national journalists who are prone to parachuting in every once in a while when there's a big interesting story happening in Michigan. We get a lot of that stuff. I think the Times had 2 Detroit stories over the weekend. Don't get me wrong, our situation is not perfect by any stretch. You heard what I said already. And we have gaps. Beats that aren't covered like they used to be. But we're still here, 100 people strong. And unlike national issues of concern, where there still are a reasonable number, maybe not enough, but a reasonable number of available and willing reporters, our ranks have thinned. But while our reach isn't as great as it once was, we're striving really hard to cover the things that affect our readership day in and day out. The small things and the big things. And I'm going to show you some examples of both in a minute here. So my message here today is you can make a difference with your journalism. It really sounds cheesy when you're young and idealistic, but I'm here to tell you, you can really live it. In fact, our society depends on you helping make that difference. Democracy depends on it, as the young woman in the back said so aptly. Who else is going to watch those in power? Who's going to watch the police? Who's going to watch our elected leaders, the rich, and speak for those people who don't have a voice? It's going to be us. The landscape is changing. There's fewer jobs, at least in my place, but that's been my experience almost everywhere. Many of my colleagues have been laid off or bought out over the years, or retired, or weren't replaced after they left, or just got fed up and headed for greener pastures. In communications or marketing or, God forbid, public relations. Some of you guys in here? Sorry. I deal with PR people every day. You're great people, and you make a lot more money than the rest of us, or you will make a lot more money than the rest of us someday. Still, my little talk tonight should be entitled, Local Journalism, You Can Do It! Again, don't get me wrong, if you aspire to tell stories from a national perspective or an international perspective, go for it. More power to you. But if you want to cover foreign battlefields or international espionage or the World Bank, there are great people out there to model yourselves after. Go ahead and chase the kings and queens. There are lots of people out there doing that stuff, though. For me, local journalism has always needed us more. Nothing wrong with working at the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times. It sounds weird to even say something like that. And I have many friends at those places. But today, more than ever, in my opinion, local journalism is the highest calling. There are so many fewer reporters in our cities, in our towns, and so much action and power and wealth that needs checked. With good reporting and, importantly, good writing, this is a writing conference, right? You can engage in work that changes lives. Work that helps your community, helps people you actually know. Change that you can actually see happening. You can be a force for good in a place where there might not be a whole lot of good. That doesn't mean writing happy stories all the time. This means working on real journalism through impactful storytelling. So there is a future, I believe that. For perspective, one more time, when I got hired, again, before the dawn of time, people were telling me as a 25-year-old that one of the newspapers in Detroit was going to go out of business. That was 33 years ago. In that time, we've also had a devastating years-long strike in my paper and the Detroit Post. Big losses in print circulation, no doubt. A massive shift to internet publication. The resulting big losses in advertising. But guess what? We're still standing. In fact, thanks to a joint operating agreement approved a year or two after I got hired at the Free Press, Detroit still has 2 daily newspapers, as Walter mentioned. That's very rare. As are successful JOAs, but that's a different discussion for a different night. Point is, this industry has had black clouds hanging over it for decades. And the reason we're still here, not the only reason, but a major reason, is because we're needed. We are necessary. Now, newspapers have closed. I don't want to overlook that. But you know what? There's still many out there, still plugging away, helping to right wrongs. Holding bad guys accountable, or even, and this is important, maybe just having an impact on someone's day-to-day life. Have you all seen a documentary called Storm Lake? By any chance? Good thing for journalism students to go dig up. I think you can find it on the streaming sites. It's about this little tiny family-run newspaper, the Storm Lake Times. And it's in Iowa, and it really struggles to pay the bills, but also tell the truth. The editor is a really interesting-looking character named Art Collins. He's got this white hair, long white hair, and a big bushy mustache. I had the pleasure to meet him last month in Detroit at the Free Film Festival, which is another service of our fine newspaper. We have a film festival, we're in our 8th year, and we feature dozens and dozens of journalistic documentaries. Anyway, Art's film was at that Free Film Festival, and he showed up. He runs this newspaper with his brother, his wife, and his son, and a couple other people. And they really struggle day to day. There's a clip in the film of him going to the local restaurant and emptying out the little piggy bank that people put their dollar in to buy his newspaper. He goes and collects it. That's how desperate things are. But the mission of journalism at the Storm Lake Times is still beating very well. Art won a Pulitzer a few years back, 2017, for writing editorials that held to account big agriculture firms. Now, this is a 3,000 circulation, twice a week newspaper with the balls to question big agriculture in a small town in the middle of the Iowa cornfields. That's how important, and to me, how impactful journalism can be. Art Collins speaks for the people and the workers when others can't or won't. That's what we do. If you haven't seen that film, I recommend it. It's very inspirational. StormLakeMovie.com. More info. He didn't pay me to say this. And dare I say it, despite all the losses we've seen over the years, I think things maybe, finally, maybe a tad, are getting better. I'm going to be criticized for jumping the gun, but I'm an optimist. Remember, they told me my paper was going to close 33 years ago. After a rough years-long transition from all things print, we've become much more adept at the digital world. We're doing audio, video storytelling. We make Emmy Award-winning documentaries, national Emmy Award-winning documentaries. So we have evolved. And now, after so many years of giving our product away, actually a quarter century of it, as you can imagine, on the internet, for the last year or so, we have finally started charging people for our product. I expected to hear some cat calls from people who don't like paying for news, because that's the general consensus, because we've trained you to be that way. I don't blame you. We've certainly heard that from the larger public. Guess what I tell those people? Too damn bad. Too bad. We're not going to give our stuff away any longer. Good journalism is way too expensive. They don't want to pay for news, but we've got to save some jobs for you guys. It costs a lot of money to do what we do. So over the last year, we've been on a very successful subscription model for the Free Press and almost all of Gannett's. That's the company that owns us now. They have 260 or so daily newspapers around the country, and we are all behind the paywall now. I'm not permitted to give exact details, but we have seen success. I'm starting to think I might have a future in this business, people. That's a very long-winded way of saying, yes, students, you can go work for newspapers. The jobs are different than long ago. There may be fewer than there used to be, but you can make a career out of this. So what does that look like? To me, it's all about the impact you make through your reporting and writing. And impact isn't just unearthing corruption. exposing great unjust, or saving humanity. Though those are all great goals, obviously, that really can come to fruition. I don't know about the saving humanity part, I might have embellished there. Impact doesn't have to be earth-shaking, though. What if you were good enough at your job as a journalist to change a reader's mood on a given day? What if you learned to write well enough to paint a vivid picture for somebody that takes their mind off their problems for that day? What if your reporting words helped you tell a story that could change just that one person's life? Is that impact? Is that being a force for good? I think it is. Good reporting can do that at the local level. Good writing can do that. I want to show you some examples of how putting in the effort can make storytelling happen. I can get this thing to work here, so bear with me. You guys read that? Then you need to blow that up. Big enough for you? People in the back? Don't read the story yet. I want to tell you about it. When you get there we go. All right. When you all make it out in the real world, you'll be asked inevitably to go cover the local fair, or the local parade, or the farmer's market. Now here's how a story like that typically gets done. You go out and interview 6 different people, get some quotes, slap a lead on it that says something like, "Blue skies and a roar of diesel engines greeted 1,250 Michiganders to the Macomb County tractor pull on Wednesday, where people slurped up slushies, crushed corn dogs, and shouted to be heard over the whine of the machines." Like that? I made that shit up. That's pretty good, though, isn't it? Top of my head. Then he tacked on quotes back to back from 6 or 8 different people, including Joe Blow, who brought his daughter Susie and son Sammy for their first roller coaster ride, and you're done with it. You throw it to the people. "Here's my story, dear reader. Have at it." And it sounds just like the same story the reader got at last year's story, the year before that, and the year before that. In other words, totally forgettable. Or, if you're Dwayne Noriyuki, the great writer I had the pleasure to work with long ago, you throw that conventional technique completely out the window. You're bored to tears with that technique. You got to do something different. You got to write a story. So you go to the fair with your ears, listening hard, your eyes wide open and your brain bent on finding a story, not just a mishmash of unremarkable, tired quotes. And to tell that story, you need to find a character, right? You tell the story of the state fair on this particular day through the eyes, the words, and the look of one single character. What? Only one person in a story? Your editor's going to think you're lazy. Shouldn't you learn that puppy up with a dozen quotes from a dozen people? Au contraire, your editor might think you're brilliant if you don't do that. A good editor would anyway. Let's look at how Dwayne did this. This is from long, long ago. It's so simple, or it seems like it is. In reality, this is very complicated stuff and pretty hard writing. Short stories can be very challenging to write, but also very compelling. Listen as I read what Dwayne did. He gathered some stunning color and fantastic quotes, and he painted a beautiful picture, I think. You can be free to disagree with me. Man and Bucket go to the fair. Detroiter brings seed with him. This is the story of a man and his bucket. The man is Donald Schramm, 50 of Detroit, a barber and substitute teacher. The white bucket is made of plastic and held 5 gallons of dish detergent before it started holding 300 pounds of Schramm, who was 5'7". Schramm was seated on his bucket Wednesday at the state fair waiting for the arrival of Vice President George Bush. "A couple of years ago, I got the idea of carrying a bucket," he said. "You know, as you grow older and as you grow fatter, unpleasantly plump, it becomes more difficult to walk around. So I got the idea of carrying a lightweight plastic bucket which I could sit on anytime I want to." When I get tired, I just turn the bucket upside down and sit down. Not only that, but I have a front row seat at any event. I just walk up the front and sit on my bucket. That's exactly where Schramm was when Bush came by and shook his hand. It looks a little silly, I suppose. It makes me look quite eccentric, but it's very practical. I wouldn't be without my bucket. If it makes so much sense, why doesn't everybody carry a bucket? I don't know, said Schramm. They're afraid, I guess, of being different. They're afraid of being eccentric. People have a tremendous urge to conform. We have to remember that eccentricity is, oh, jeez. Sorry. Wrong button. Oh, no. Here it is. Eccentricity is not a sin, and conformity is not always a virtue. You might see Schramm at the state fair, an ethnic festival, the zoo, or at a parade with his bucket, which he bought from a restaurant for $1. I keep it in my car all the time. You never know when a building's going to burn down somewhere, and I'll want to park the car and sit on my bucket and watch it burn down. The person carrying a bucket at the fair appears to be within his element. I get a lot of questions. Where's this? Where's that? Of course, I've been coming to the fair for so many years, I can usually tell them where it is. If I can't, then I just explain to them that I don't know. I'm just carrying the bucket. Schramm is very independent. He said he is happily unmarried and enjoys the freedom to go where he wants to go and sit where he wants to sit. The bucket is not his only eccentricity, just the most visible one. A lot of people would probably consider my philosophic orientation a little eccentric, but that's not as noticeable as the bucket. He explains his philosophy on a piece of paper entitled My Philosophy, which states, in part, life is an exercise in utility. Perfect happiness depends on a perfect adjustment to reality, and a perfect adjustment to reality depends on a perfect concept of reality. Only God has a perfect concept of reality, and only God can be perfectly happy. But a good bucket doesn't hurt. I love that story. I mean, that takes guts to go to the state fair and come back with a story like that. But it is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. The color that's in there, the surprises. His philosophy is written on a sheet of paper called My Philosophy. I love that. The poignancy, he got into that guy's business and told more about his life in the 12 inches or 15 inches of that story is than some 45-inch obituaries that are written about people. Dwayne got that out of that guy just by hanging out with him as the parade went by. It takes a lot of guts. I love it. To me, that's local journalism, so memorable that I still use the story 29 years after it was written. This is the kind of work that can have an impact on people, even if it's just to bring a smile to their stressed out faces. It's not the sun and the moon of outstanding journalism, but it moves you. That's something to accomplish. All right, moving on. I used to cover crime in the city of Detroit. I'd go out on the streets of the city with a scanner and I'd hopscotch around every night, from crime scenes to fires to crime scenes. It was quite an experience. Detroit, like many big American cities, provided a lot to cover. Sometimes I'd write 3 or 4 stories a day. Thing is, if you do that enough, you start getting tired of what you're seeing. The victims, the violence, the suffering, the desperation. For me, I felt that. I was young and I didn't have any wife or kids or anyone to worry about, but I felt the impact these conditions were having on the human spirit in Detroit. And now that I have a family, I think these things would hit me even harder today. So, back then, young, smart-ass reporter that I was, I'd find myself covering things that made me feel like garbage, and things that seemed hopeless, things that lots of people just didn't seem to care enough about. So you know what I did? I started thinking, if I have to endure all this tragedy, it's very selfish. I want to have an impact. I want my reporting and writing to help foster a better solution. Now, I don't know if I accomplished that, frankly, in my 3 or 4 years of covering many cops in Detroit, but I tried. My stories started aiming at the readers instead of just covering a story in the inverted pyramid style. I go to crime scenes and write about the emotion and the impact of the crime, not just the who, what, where, when, why, and how. I decided if I have to feel so sad about the situation, I'm bringing people with me. I'm bringing readers to the scene of crime. You sons of bitches are going to see what I can see. Maybe one of you will fix it. That's what I thought. Now, this is the best example of what that I have, but it did cause something very surprising. So to me, the smallest thing you can do in this business can have a profound impact on people. Through good reporting, good writing, your words can have very lasting impressions. And don't ever take that for granted. It's an awesome privilege, one we should handle with great care and responsibility. But also with smarts. This kind of power directed fairly and reasonably in the right direction can cause real change, I think. So, this is a story of her. It's short. I'm going to read it. 1-year-old Anna Faulkner, who took her first steps only recently, might never walk again. On Monday, Anna got caught up in someone else's problem, just like a lot of Detroit children in recent weeks. A bullet went through the door of her East Side home and hit her in the neck, damaging her spinal cord, relatives said. She also may have brain damage. She was in critical condition Monday night at St. John Hospital in Detroit. Whoever shot her was bold. Police said as many as 3 men hid in bushes outside the home at Cope and Warren near Common. At 12:50 p.m., when 2 men from the upstairs flat walked outside, the gunman blasted away. Darius Hawthorne, 20, was killed. Anthony Thomas, 20, is at St. John Hospital with a shot in the leg. Police said they were involved in drugs, and the gunplay may have revolved around money. No one was arrested. Possible motive was no surprise to Anna's relatives, who huddled outside the downstairs flat where Anna lived with her mother, peering at each other through the cold rain. Some family members wondered aloud why someone can't end the violence. Some neighborhood residents said they didn't know what was going on in that house. Then some of them smiled and changed the subject. Man, oh man, it hurts, said Laura Young, 26, Anna's aunt. Since Saturday, 4 children have been shot in Michigan, 3 in Detroit, 1 in Flint. The 3 before Monday, ages 18 months, 8, and 13, were shot by other youngsters. Those 3 died. According to a tally of police records, at least 140 youths aged 16 and under have been shot in Detroit this year. 19 have died. Young was angry at the men who shot her niece and furious at the drug lords who profit from pumping pain in her neighborhood. Drug rehabilitation, education, they need all that, she said, but they don't want it. A male relative said to Young, people do things because they watch all them old Clint Eastwood movies and they want to try. Outside the home, police interviewed neighbors, picked through bushes for evidence, and looked for gunpowder on people who were around when the shooting started. It doesn't pay to be a kid anymore, one investigator said. So, I wrote that story hoping somebody would get something out of it. And this is what happened. Hello, Mr. Schaefer. My name is Anna Faulkner. A few years ago, you wrote a story about my gunshot accident. Every day of my life, I've read that newspaper article. I started writing a book about my life and everything I went through. I'm nowhere near done. I just wanted to tell you thanks. I've always said that I'd reach out to you. You know who she is. That's the baby. I got shot. Sent me a Facebook message 19 years after I wrote that story. And that's what she told me. She wanted people to know she was the one who survived. She's the one that made it out, despite terrible surroundings. She wanted people to know that there's hope. So, I never expected that. You never know how your work's going to resonate. All right. Some Sometimes that's a little impact, right? Not for her, but in the grand scheme of the world. Sometimes your impact can be quite dramatic when you're doing local reporting. Sometimes you can even win a Pulitzer-Prize. They give them out to idiots, apparently. All right. Now, to be clear, you don't set out to win a Pulitzer-Prize. That never works. I've seen many try in the business and many fail. What you do is commit to your craft. You work on your reporting, you hone your writing, you be visible in your community, you build good sources, you read good writers, so when the time comes, you can write like them, or maybe a little bit like them. Reading good writing is so important to help you learn techniques and how to have impact. So a little background on this Pulitzer Prize winning story. A little background, my work partner, a guy named Mike Elrick, and I covered the mayor of Detroit for years. Kwame Kilpatrick came to the job at a very young age, 31, and with a broad swath of support. My own newspaper's editorial page endorsed him for the job. Lots of people like this guy. But to cut to the chase, he got into trouble, a lot of trouble. And most of that was prompted by our stories. Now, it's not like we dislike the mayor. I want to be very clear on that. But it's our job to make sure our elected officials are doing the work we elect them to do. So we pay attention, and we have really good sources. So we did a few stories over the years, dozens and dozens of investigative stories. Fortunately, I only brought that many. Just real quick, I'm just going to scroll through these headlines and not say much about them. They speak for themselves. DC cops wouldn't go around the mayor because they were afraid he was going to endanger them when he went out of town. Because he'd go into strip clubs and dance clubs, and that's not safe when you have a bunch of gun-toting men protecting you. This was a getaway. Charged to the city of Detroit, where they're laying off cops. He went to the Bahamas. We didn't know at the time that he went with his girlfriend, not his wife. But we were nosing around on it this early. This one was especially satisfying because the mayor spent a lot of money on things. And I don't know if you could see those expense reports, but we had sued trying to get his credit card records, and they wouldn't give it to us on the Freedom of Information Act. My partner got a hold of an unredacted stack of the records on the right. But we had this lawsuit pending, and we thought we might get the records. So much to my partner's credit, he said, we should sit on these and not do the story because you know they're going to do something crazy. And we won the settlement in the lawsuit, and they had to turn over the same documents to us. But on the left, those are the redactions that they made. But we had the unredacted versions. And so we did this story showing the expenses for this lead. Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick doesn't want you to know about some things. The spa visits, the hotel room for his family babysitter, the posh suite at the Luxor Casino he and his family shared in Las Vegas, the $850 steakhouse dinner, the $836 charged to the credit card for his sister's stay in New Orleans. And on and on and on. We wanted to hit that story very hard, and it had almost no impact, we thought. Lots of these stories got mayors indicted in other cities, and nothing happened in Detroit when we did these stories. At least we thought that at the time. He would write a check and reimburse some of the money, and then life would move on. But then we did this story. Figure out which one of those it is. Kind of like we have. So what this is we got over 14,000 text messages that the mayor had sent between himself and his chief of staff, a woman named Christine Beatty. And she ended up quitting a week after this story, and he fled to Florida with his family. Wouldn't talk to us. But what ensued after this, what we proved is that, and we also had to do a FOIA lawsuit that went to the Michigan Supreme Court. But I don't want to keep yammering about this. 10 months later, he resigned. We did a couple of other stories that I do want to show you if I can find the right slide here. So we did a text message story, but then we had all this other stuff in the text messages that we didn't get to, including the mayor having how many people in his family and friends working for the city of Detroit? 29. 29 people either related or closely associated with him work for the city of Detroit. Anyway, so we didn't think anything would happen because no impact had happened with our other stories. But wouldn't you know it, a month after we did this text message story, the Wayne County prosecutor hit Mr. Kilpatrick and Christine B. with multiple felony charges, including perjury, misconduct in office, and so on and so forth. He ended up going to jail. Was ordered to pay $1 million back to the city. His chief of staff went to jail too. Several lawyers who represented him were disciplined by the State Attorney Grievance Commission. The city of Detroit paid us hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees for a successful FOIA lawsuit, which we then, I think, gave back because the city was in bad shape, or they cut it in half. I can't remember the details. Eventually, and I'm a little stunned by this, the Constitution of the state of Michigan was amended because of our stories. It put in something they called the Kwame Amendment, which was on the ballot, to never allow somebody who was convicted of a felony related to your office to run again for office for 20 years. We thought that was the end of it. Not quite. Those other stories that I mentioned earlier, you saw a couple of them, the extensive story, and we thought they had no impact, but they ended up landing with a resounding thud a few years later when the federal government issued new indictments against the mayor and several other people that alleged a grand conspiracy to use the power of the mayor's office to defraud the citizens of Detroit of millions of dollars. And mind you, this is a city that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Turns out the feds had been watching all along. Much of their indictment read like a recitation of our stories over the years. In the end, Mr. Kilpatrick went to prison for 28 years, which was the longest public corruption sentence in U.S. history. Longest public corruption sentence in U.S. history, tied with a guy outside Cleveland who did something similar a year earlier. And then, you may have known this, just last year, President Donald Trump let him out at the end of 2020. And a huge surprise few saw coming. He commuted the sentence and the former mayor was set free after serving 8 years of his sentence. So there you have it, people. A few stories about writing and impact at the local level. Journalism is such a powerful tool. Writing, whether it's a long narrative, a short blurb, a broadcast script, is such a powerful tool. Not many people have the ability. If you're in this room, you do have it, or at least you want it, and you're willing to learn. This puts you in such a positive, powerful position. Please do what you can to use it. In today's world of tweets and TikTok and all that good stuff, writing might be a dying art, and it's up to you to keep breathing life into it. Thanks everybody very much. Appreciate it. Should I bring this?
Thanks very much, Jim. That was such a wonderful talk and such a good illustration of the importance of local journalism, its impact on residents, the centrality of it for the health of any community, and the role that good writing can play in bringing all those messages home. So I think we have about 10 or 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So I'd like to invite any of you wonderful journalism students or anyone else who's in the audience who has a question to approach the mics. We have 2 on either side, so come on up and we'll try to get to everyone. And as we're getting started with that, I asked my American journalism students this morning to come up with some questions for you, and they have a lot. So I can get going with a few of those while you guys get ready. I know you're working on stories, so don't be shy, come on up. One student asked, how does knowing the culture and values of a city like Detroit help you do your work?
Wow, that's a great question. Because I'm like a fish out of water in many parts of Detroit, right? It's a predominantly black city. I'm a white kid from Columbus, Ohio, and I had to learn a lot. And I credit Detroit with forming many of my values today that I just things I wasn't aware of when I was growing up in Ohio. I could never pretend to know them as well as somebody who was born into those circumstances and has to live it on a regular basis. But I did my best to expose myself as much as possible. Because you can't write about people if you don't know a little bit about them. And that's what I try to do. I think it's extremely important to immerse yourself in whatever area you're covering, whatever the circumstances are.
Right, so good advice for students who are going out and starting at a local TV station somewhere far from home.
Oh yeah, those are tough gigs. Working for the small newspaper or the small town TV station is brutal, but that's the way a lot of people work themselves up through the ranks. I had many friends who did that. I was fortunate. I got hired as a copy editor at a newspaper that maybe didn't have a future. So I got to go to a much bigger newspaper than some of my friends did. Some of them were no longer in the business because of the experiences they had working at some of the smaller outfits. But others are, and they really appreciated the experience they had from, just working their way up.
You also mentioned, some of the personal difficulty in covering crime, right, in covering tragedy. And one student wondered, she wrote, in your final call to the series, A Few Minutes With, you mentioned that journalists often see the worst side of people. How have you dealt with constantly seeing that negative? And then another student to follow up asked about, what challenged you, what the story has been most challenging for you.
I don't know who came up with that, but that's nice that you went back and found A Few Minutes With. That's a column I used to write on Sundays. I really like that because that's one way that I coped with dealing with tragedy. And right during all the Kilpatrick stuff, we're writing these heavy-duty investigative stories. I would go out and interview somebody who's riding around downtown Detroit wearing a grown man wearing a full Winnie the Pooh outfit and do a column about it. I mean, it was just it was a Q&A I did every week. And it was really a release for me. In fact, my partner, Mike Elrick, hated it when I would take a day to go do A Few Minutes with it. But that's one way I coped. And another way, it's really terrible if you become cynical as a journalist. You have to believe, through whatever means necessary, that there's good in people. And that you can find that good, and that you can find a good person. You might be investigating terrible situations and interviewing and writing about terrible people, but you find the good things and the good people to help you do those stories. And that always was reassuring to me, but it's not easy, no doubt.
So kind of along those lines, another student asked, has there ever been a story you've covered that made you stop in your tracks and reflect on it?
You guys don't really want to hear old journalist stories, do you? Yes, I did a story once on this kid who had a head injury and he was missing. He fell out of the back of a pickup truck, and his family was very concerned, and they were having a party one night, gathering people to their sister's house to go out and search for him because they were afraid he wasn't on his medication. I, being the nosy journalist who wanted details for the story, was at the house where they were gathering, and right when they were going out on the street, I said, hey, can we go to your brother, the house where your brother lives, with your parents? Because I want to look at it, his bedroom, even if you'll let me. And he let me up there, his dad and his sister. And I'm writing down the posters that he has on the wall and what kind of music he's listening to. As I'm standing there, the dad looks down and sees a pad of paper on the desk. And he starts reading through it, and he's like, what is this? And I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. I immediately shrunk, and I wanted to leave. And I'm like, I don't know what he started reading out loud. And it was a suicide note. And they found it while I was standing there. And that stopped me in my tracks. I said, I'm going to leave. You guys, this is way too personal. I don't want to be here for this. And they said, no, we want you to be here. We want you to write the story. And I'm like, all right. I started taking notes. And to make a long story shorter, they ended up finding his body on the second floor of the garage. When they called the police back, they had searched it before, and not very well apparently, because they didn't find the note and they didn't find the body until I went back and noticed around the kids' bedroom.
Realizing people telling the stories and all of that connection to the community and to others. We all have faced so many challenges in the past year and a half with the pandemic and lockdowns and all of the changes it brought to our lives and our careers and everything else. Can you tell us how did COVID affect you and your workplace and your reporting?
I hate COVID. I hate working from home. I have 3 dogs who won't leave me alone. They are constantly in the room that I sit in and edit stories on a laptop. I don't record anymore. I'm an editor now. So I'm ready to go back to the office. We have this very large empty newsroom. I go there about once a week. We're not prohibited from being in there, but people just aren't going because the company's not making people go. And that's made a lot of challenges for our reporters who don't want to, especially early on, expose themselves to coronavirus. So we've left it up to them. One of the hardest things I have to teach my students is to interview people face to face. And now everybody's got to build an excuse not to do that. And it drives me crazy because you need to talk to people face to face. That's how you get truth. And that's how you get color and the reactions to your questions. So COVID has built an excuse to not do that anymore, so I hope it's over with very quickly. It's not going to be, but yeah, I'm ready to get back to work.
How many of you guys have changed the way that you report for the classroom? You ready to go back to normal? Right? Okay.
You guys like to interview people over the phone? Do you like to interview people face to face? Really? Not over email or Twitter or whatever, TikTok? Okay, because those are my students. That's what they want to do. I'm going to send them some questions. No, you're not. You're going to go talk to them.
Okay, we have time for probably one or two more, but what was your favorite story that you've covered and how did that impact your career?
Where's the kid who said he wanted to live life through journalism? Is that you up here? Yeah. So I've been to 2 World Series, 2 Stanley Cups, 2 NBA championships. I've gotten to interview presidents, minor celebrities, and go to really interesting places. I once had to go down to Mexico and talk my way into a prison outside of Mexico City to interview a guy who had been indicted in Chicago, and they were trying to extradite him. And the reason he was indicted is because he had made homemade fentanyl that shipped up through Chicago and through Detroit. It killed 180 people in our Tri-County area. And we tracked him down because he was in prison. And I went down there and had to talk my way into that prison. That was a great experience. That's the kind of stuff you can get from journalism, young man. Get into prisons.
Well, I think we'll have you for a few minutes after the event before the next one. So if anyone has any questions for him and would like to come up. Oh, of course, yes, absolutely.
How are you? Bradley Child, junior studying public relations. So question for you. what was there like a moment in your life that made you want to become a writer? Like, was your aspirations always like, I want to become a writer? Your dad was a writer, you reported to writing, or was there like a specific moment that made you want to?
No newspaper people in my family, they're all engineers, and I did not get that side of the brain. I don't know why I had my mom's side of the brain. She was she was into reading. But no, it was a teacher. I had a good English teacher in high school. And she said, you know what? You should write some stuff. And I'm like, okay. But then she got me a job as a junior in high school working for I went to a Catholic high school, and the diocese had a newspaper weekly. And they needed what they call a high school editor, and you were supposed to take news from all the schools in our conference and just do little snippets. But I turned it into a full-fledged opinion column and did it for 2 years and loved every bit of it, and that's what got me into it. But my dad used to read a lot of newspapers, so it was a natural.
Did you major in journalism?
Yes, when I went to Ohio State, you could graduate with a major in journalism. That no longer is possible, and I'm very bitter about that. It's communication. Yes. Hi. Other people in the newsroom, including another Pulitzer-Prize winner, came up after that story landed and said, that's a Pulitzer story. And I'm like, shut up. You are killing me. I'm superstitious. I don't believe in that. I don't even want to think like that. And then we heard there were rumblings that the prosecutor was trying to get her own text messages. It was a real roller coaster ride for like 18 months. We thought we were going to be deposed. How did we get the text messages? Were they going to raid our office and take our notes? Those were all very real possibilities. In the end, they went and got their own text messages, as did the FBI, and stitched together a case on their own. We didn't have to do anything. But we had heard they were looking at it. I'm still shocked. I can remember sitting in the office of the prosecutor, live blogging it, and tears came to my eyes, not because of happiness, but just something we had done had finally had some impact. I was shocked that somebody had taken our work and replicated it and found it to be completely truthful and accurate. We never did a single correction. And here, somebody's doing something about it. It was very satisfying as a journalist. Sure, thank you.
My question was, understand really the challenges of reporting and
Michigan has the worst public records laws in the country, almost. I probably exaggerate a little bit, but it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And that is a big issue for us. The I-team reporters all report to me through another editor, and we struggle to get public information in Michigan. They reformed the law in 2015, I think it was, and made it worse. Right now, there's no time limit on when they can give you documents. It just says reasonable amount of time in the law, which is constantly perverted by the government, who doesn't want to turn over documents they think they own. So that's the biggest challenge for me. There's a little bit of distrust of the media as well that we all have to work around these days, and it's gotten worse in recent years. Not so much in Detroit, but if I go up into Macomb County or some of the farmlands north of Detroit, people won't talk. That's Trump country, and they do not trust the media, and that's a very difficult thing. We still try because we want to represent their views, but that's become a real challenge in recent years.
We have about 5 minutes left, so maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then feel free to come up afterwards and talk.
Hi, I'm Quinn, I'm a sophomore in the broadcast journalism major,
and this is more of a discussion on writing, but I know that for a really long time I was super excited to be a journalist. I just felt like there was so much creativity, and I know a lot of my peers have felt this way, and now I'm learning about AP style. And I feel like, well, it's not a bad thing, like I think it's really beneficial, but at the same time I feel like I'm not really writing for me enough, and it doesn't sound like my voice as much. And I was just wondering if you had any tips on how you write an AP style and still your voice.
I love AP style. I do. There's a reason for it. You don't want things like addresses and numbers to be appearing in a million different formats, right? But it's not that restrictive. Do you think it's that restrictive? I mean, yeah, if you're writing a column, I could see that. But yeah, just don't use words that are in the AP style. Sorry, I don't know, because I teach copy editing, and AP style is one of the things that I teach. So I think you just have to read. Here's what I would do if I were you. Read good journalism. Look at the big newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post. Look at Politico online. Look at great writers, Frank Bruni in New York Times. Read his stuff and see how he gets around it. See how really good reporters get around it. Because reading is where you learn that stuff. I can't just tell you how to do it. You got to read more. And maybe you are, I'm not assuming that you're not, but reading is the key to this stuff.
Okay, we'll take the last one for the mic, and then please stay afterwards so you can.
I'm going to present. I'm going to stop on you've written, but you've written about reporting, video techniques, auto business communication, and content. I don't know, but when you were writing, what was the most fulfilling thing you were writing?
Well, I think I gave a little bit of it away in my examples. I like stories that move people. You know, I mean, investigative stories are awesome. Don't get me wrong. It's nice when, like one time we did a story about, do you guys know the Fab Five from Michigan, the basketball team? Jalen Rose, who was a very well-liked, well-known announcer on one of the cable news networks now, got busted in a dope house when he was at Michigan. And we found out that everybody else that was with him, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just there. It's his friends. He's from the neighborhood. So nobody was condemning him for that. But we found out that everybody else's ticket went through and somebody pulled Jalen's ticket. And that isn't fair. So we did a story about it. And he denied it. We tried to interview him 3 times. And his last quote was, "Not in 10,000 years was I in that crack house." So we did the story anyway, because we had an interview with his friend who said he was there, and we had the ticket. And the next day he had to hold a press conference with Steve Fisher, his head coach, and Chris Webber was standing next to him, and he walked up and said, "You know what? I was in that house." And it's just nice. I don't bear any ill will against Jalen Rose, but it's nice to get people to tell the truth. And that, to me, is the most satisfying thing, and then moving them through your writing. Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank all of you for coming, and please join me in thanking Jim Schaefer. Right here for the second day. Thanks.